For most people, birthdays are about cake, friends, and celebration. But for Katie Malone, her 29th birthday in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, turned into a survival story so unbelievable it could have been ripped straight from a movie. On June 9th, Katie strapped herself into a parasail, ready for the thrill of soaring high above the Pacific. At first, everything was perfect. The ocean sparkling below, the resort coastline in view, the kind of moment you live for on vacation. She smiled, waved at friends watching from the shore, and settled in for what was supposed to be an unforgettable birthday adventure. But just minutes into the ride, she realized something was very, very wrong. The boat that was supposed to be pulling her was headed one way. She was flying in the other. That's when it hit her. The tow line had snapped. Suddenly, she wasn't connected to the boat at all. She was on her own, drifting helplessly above the coast with no way down. What followed was a nightmare that lasted nearly 45 minutes. Katie was carried by the wind down the shoreline, heading closer and closer to land, completely powerless. At one point, she came frighteningly close to slamming into the balconies of a resort. So close, she could hear guests screaming in terror as she flew past. Somehow, she missed them by inches. One wrong gust of wind, and the story could have ended right there. Katie's brother, Brendan Malone, later explained how she tried to control the uncontrollable. Drawing on experience from skydiving, she used her feet like anchors, gripping the dangling rope to steer as best she could. Her arms were raised, her feet guiding the parasail, all while she prayed out loud for her safety. More than anything, she feared breaking her arms and legs on impact. Minutes felt like hours. The wind tossed her up and down, dragging her across the skies. Around the 20-minute mark, the stress and exhaustion became too much. Katie passed out mid-flight. Yet the parasail carried her on, finally crash-landing nearly 2 miles away at an airport, far from where she had started. When rescuers reached her, the damage was brutal. A broken pelvis, 4 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and injuries to her face and side. And yet, against all odds, Katie was alive. And if that wasn't surreal enough, there was one more twist. Just as rescuers approached, an alligator was spotted lurking by the fence where she had landed. Emergency workers had to scare the animal off before they could even reach her. Later, when Katie heard about the gator, she actually laughed and said she thought it was hilarious. Her brother summed it up perfectly. She's very lucky to be alive. Katie spent 18 days in a Mexican hospital, undergoing 3 surgeries before being flown back to the U.S. for treatment at UCSD Medical Center in San Diego. Her family described her as incredibly strong, even joking with nurses and staying in high spirits despite her pain. At one point, doctors kept asking her to rate her pain between 1 and 10. She kept saying 8 to 10, but when she was finally discharged for her transfer back home, she told them she didn't feel any pain at all. Her mother, Sidona, admitted she collapsed after watching terrifying footage of Katie's flight, filmed by a friend on the beach. But she also said seeing her daughter alive after everything was nothing short of a miracle. We're really thankful. She's very lucky to be alive. The family has even received offers of help for potential legal action against the parasailing company. But more than lawsuits or compensation, what matters to them most is that Katie is alive, recovering, and stronger than ever. Katie's story isn't just about tragedy. It's about resilience, survival, and sheer luck. What was supposed to be a birthday adventure nearly ended her life, but instead, it showed the world just how strong she really is. July 27, 2002, was meant to be a proud celebration for Ukraine. At Sknyliv airfield near Lviv, a massive air show was organized to mark the 60th anniversary of a Ukrainian Air Corps division. The excitement was enormous. Around 10,000 people gathered, many bringing their families. Parents took time off work. Children clutched balloons and snacks, and crowds buzzed with anticipation of spectacular aerial maneuvers. Originally, a MiG-29 fighter jet had been scheduled to perform, but when bad weather prevented its arrival, a Sukhoi Su-27, one of the most advanced jets in Ukraine's arsenal, was brought in instead. For the seasoned pilots of the Ukrainian Falcons aerobatic team, this substitution seemed routine. Few could have imagined that within minutes, the day would turn into the deadliest airshow disaster in history. At 12:52 p.m., the Su-27 began a low rolling maneuver directly over the tightly packed crowd, but something was clearly wrong. The jet dipped dangerously low, flipped its wing on the ground, and struck two parked aircraft before careening into the spectators. The wing sliced through the audience like a blade, sending bodies and debris flying. Seconds later, the fighter erupted into a massive fireball, engulfing the area in flames and black smoke. The carnage was almost beyond comprehension. Survivors recalled scenes of absolute chaos, people screaming, running with their clothes on fire, desperately trying to escape. For those closest to the crash, there was no chance. Among the survivors was a 3-year-old boy named Oleg, known in reports as Oop. He lived only because his mother threw herself over him, shielding him from the blast. Tragically, she was killed, along with dozens of others, including Oleg's 10-year-old brother, who was thrown by the shockwave but miraculously survived. Stories like this multiplied, parents sacrificing themselves for their children, families torn apart in an instant. The statistics were staggering. 77 people killed, 28 of them children, more than 250 others injured. The destruction was so complete that rescuers described the aftermath with one chilling word: biomass. Many victims were impossible to identify. Ukraine declared a national day of mourning, but grief quickly gave way to anger. As investigations unfolded, attention turned to accountability. Both pilots had ejected and survived. Criminal charges were filed against 10 people connected to the show's organization. In the end, primary pilot Volodymyr Toponar was sentenced to 14 years in prison, while his co-pilot, Yuri Yegorov, received 8 years. Several officers were also punished, though higher-ranking generals and commanders of the Air Force were acquitted. Toponar, a veteran with 27 years of flying experience, insisted that his engines lost power during the maneuver, something he could not control. But prosecutors argued the pilots had been pressured into dangerous stunts directly above the crowd without adequate preparation or training. Regardless of the technical cause, the court's ruling stood firm. The disaster at Sknyliv remains the deadliest airshow tragedy in history. In its aftermath, Ukraine banned all military airshows, and the event became a permanent scar in aviation history. What was supposed to be a celebration of national pride ended as a sobering reminder of the catastrophic risks when spectacle overtakes safety. In the summer of 1930, Krug Park in Omaha, Nebraska, was a popular gathering place for families and thrill-seekers. The centerpiece of the park was the Big Dipper, a wooden roller coaster that promised speed, excitement, and the kind of nervous laughter that only a steep drop could inspire. But on July 24th, the ride took a tragic turn that would leave a permanent mark on the city's history. That afternoon, a train of coaster cars was climbing the first hill, as it had done countless times before. Riders were anticipating the rush of the upcoming descent when, without warning, the train derailed near the top. The cars broke free and plummeted down the track, colliding with one another in a violent chain reaction. What began as an ordinary amusement park ride ended in catastrophe. 4 people were killed in the accident, and approximately 17 others sustained serious injuries. The shock was immediate and far-reaching. The Big Dipper crash quickly became front-page news, not just in Omaha but across the country. Amusement rides, once viewed as safe escapes from daily life, were suddenly questioned. For the victims' families and those who survived, the day became a defining moment of grief and loss. City officials acted quickly. Within weeks, Omaha's city council passed an ordinance banning roller coasters within city limits, a law that would remain in place for decades. The ban reflected both the fear and anger felt by the community in the wake of the tragedy. Krug Park itself never regained its former popularity. Once a place of laughter and leisure, it slowly declined, the memory of the Big Dipper accident overshadowing its attractions. The 1930 incident remains one of the deadliest roller coaster accidents in American history. Beyond the numbers, it underscored the risks inherent in amusement rides and the responsibility of operators to maintain safety. For Omaha, the Big Dipper became more than just a ride. It became a symbol of how quickly joy can turn into disaster, and how a single tragic event can reshape the future of an entire community. Imagine this. You're on a family vacation in the Florida Keys. The sun is shining, the water is sparkling, and you decide to do something unforgettable. Parasailing. It feels like the perfect memory in the making. But for one family, that dream turned into the most devastating nightmare imaginable. On May 30th, 2022, 33-year-old Supraja Alaparthy joined her young son and nephew for a parasailing adventure. They were on vacation, just trying to soak up every moment together. But the joy didn't last long. As they rose into the air, the weather suddenly shifted. Winds picked up, and according to investigators, the parasail was pegged, a dangerous situation where the parachute is completely controlled by the wind instead of the boat pulling it. That's when the unthinkable happened. The boat's captain, Daniel Couch, made a decision that still haunts this family today. Instead of safely bringing the parasail down, he cut the tow line, with Supraja, her son, and her nephew still attached. In seconds, they were no longer tethered to the boat. Instead, the massive parachute dragged them helplessly across the water until they smashed into a nearby bridge. Supraja didn't survive. Her son and nephew were badly injured, but lived to tell the tale. Her husband, Sknyliv Alaparthy, remembers that moment with chilling clarity. He described the chaos and terror of watching everything unfold. It was terrifying and horrible, he told reporters. Imagine being right there, powerless, begging for someone to help your family. According to the family's attorney, Sknyliv even grabbed the captain's leg, pleading with him to do something, only to be told, "Don't worry, the bridge will help." The bridge did not help. Captain Couch was later charged with manslaughter and multiple boating violations, though he has pleaded not guilty. But for Supraja's family, no legal battle could ever undo what happened that day. The Alaparthys have since filed a lawsuit against the captain, his colleague, the boat company, and the marina. Their claim that this entire tragedy could and should have been prevented. Attorneys argue that the company ignored weather warnings, failed to provide basic safety equipment like proper life jackets, and didn't follow standard procedures to bring the parasail down safely. In other words, what should have been a fun family memory turned into a disaster because of one failure after another. Their attorney, Pedro Acharte, put it bluntly. There were so many opportunities for them to stop this from happening, but yet there's failure after failure after failure. Now, the family is using their grief to try to save others. They want stricter rules in place for the parasailing industry, more safety checks, better equipment, and accountability when operators cut corners. Acharte warns vacationers not to simply trust flashy websites or glowing reviews. Instead, he says, ask questions. What are your policies? What's your procedure? What safety equipment do you have? If it doesn't feel right, don't go. A year later, Sknyliv says his only wish is that no other family ever goes through what his did. He summed it up with words we should all remember before chasing adventure. Having fun is not worth the cost of life. There should be enough safety measures, otherwise they will end up in a miserable situation. This heartbreaking story is a reminder that behind every thrill-seeking adventure, safety should always come first. On September 16, 2011, what started as a thrilling day of high-speed aviation turned into one of the darkest moments in airshow history. The setting was Reno Airport in Nevada, home of the famous Reno Air Races. These races are often described as the world's fastest motorsport, where pilots push themselves and their machines to the absolute limit. Each year, crowds gathered to witness highly skilled aviators maneuver warbirds and racing aircraft at breathtaking speeds, sometimes just a few meters above the ground. Imagine cars speeding at 200 miles per hour in NASCAR, except in the sky, with machines capable of flying faster than 800 kilometers per hour. That's the intensity of Reno. On that fateful day, one particular plane drew the crowd's attention, a North American P-51 Mustang, a legendary World War II fighter jet nicknamed the Galloping Ghost. This wasn't just a museum piece, it had been heavily modified to race at maximum speed. Under its controls was 74-year-old Jimmy Leeward, a seasoned Hollywood stunt pilot and air racer with more than 13,000 hours of flying experience. He wasn't just familiar with planes, he lived and breathed them. Over the years, he'd earned permits for multiple aircraft types, including experimental models. To the thousands of fans watching, Leeward represented the heart of Reno: courage, speed, and skill. That afternoon, Leeward was among the top 3 pilots competing. The crowd was buzzing with excitement as the aircraft thundered past the stands in tight formation. But then, in an instant, everything changed. After executing a high-speed turn near the spectator area, Leeward's Mustang suddenly pitched upward at an almost vertical angle. For a brief moment, the plane disappeared against the clouds, and onlookers thought it might be part of the maneuver. But seconds later, horror unfolded. The galloping ghost rolled inverted and then dropped into a violent nosedive. Traveling at nearly 640 kilometers per hour, it plummeted directly toward the packed grandstands. The crowd barely had time to register what was happening. There was no chance to react or run. In a heartbeat, the P-51 slammed into the spectator area with catastrophic force. The impact was devastating. The sheer speed of the crash meant that everything within several dozen meters was obliterated instantly. Debris, parts of the plane, and tragically people. Survivors recalled the deafening sound, followed by clouds of dust and the sickening silence that comes after disaster, only to be broken by panicked screams and cries for help. People rushed in every direction, desperately trying to escape the chaos, while others, just meters away, were still frozen in shock, some even capturing the horror on their phones. One small mercy was that the Mustang's fuel dispersed into the air before it could ignite. Had there been an explosion, the death toll might have been far higher. Even without fire, the tragedy was immense. 7 people, including Jimmy Leeward, died instantly at the crash site. 4 more later succumbed to their injuries in hospitals, bringing the death toll to 11. Dozens more were left with serious, life-altering injuries. But what caused such a catastrophic failure in the first place? Investigations revealed chilling details. The galloping ghost had undergone extensive modifications over the years to squeeze out every ounce of speed possible. These changes included structural adjustments that weakened the airframe. Even worse, some of the fasteners and components inside the plane hadn't been replaced for over 25 years. During the race, as Leeward pushed the Mustang to its limits, the stresses on the aircraft became unbearable. In the middle of that high G turn near the stands, critical components failed. The aircraft began to deform, and ultimately control was lost. The Reno Air Races had seen crashes before. It's a dangerous sport by nature, but nothing on this scale. The 2011 disaster remains the deadliest tragedy in the event's history, and one of the darkest days in airshow culture worldwide. What was supposed to be a celebration of speed and aviation turned into a reminder of just how unforgiving the sky can be. On May 30th, 1972, a sunny bank holiday meant Battersea Park Funfair in London was alive with excitement. Families poured in. Children ran between stalls, and the park's crown jewel, the Big Dipper, drew in eager crowds. For years, this wooden roller coaster had been the main attraction, promising thrills, speed, and laughter. But that afternoon, what was meant to be an ordinary ride turned into one of the darkest moments in British amusement park history. As one of the coaster trains was being hauled up the first incline, the chain mechanism suddenly failed. Normally, a safety device called an anti-rollback ratchet would prevent the cars from sliding back down, but on this day it malfunctioned. In seconds, the train rolled backwards uncontrollably, gaining momentum until it collided with another car waiting in the station. The crash was devastating. 5 children lost their lives, and 13 others were left injured, some severely. In the midst of what had been a scene of holiday cheer, panic and grief took over. Emergency services rushed in, but the damage had already been done. The tragedy sparked national outrage and soul-searching about how such a preventable accident could occur in a place designed for joy. Investigations revealed multiple safety oversights, from aging equipment to poor maintenance practices. The Big Dipper never reopened, and within a few years, Battersea Park Funfair itself was shut down. The disaster is remembered today as the worst roller coaster accident in the United Kingdom, and it left a lasting mark on amusement ride safety standards. Beyond regulations and technical details, the incident also carried a powerful human reminder. Behind the flashing lights and excitement of fun fairs, lives are placed in the hands of machinery and those responsible for its upkeep. The Battersea Park disaster stands as a sobering lesson that entertainment should never come at the expense of safety, and it remains an event that shaped how rides across the country and the world are designed, inspected, and trusted. When people think of parasailing, they imagine adventure, soaring through the air, gliding over sparkling water, and creating the kind of memories you brag about long after vacation is over. But in Pakistan's Haripur district, one woman's fun day out at Khanpur Dam ended in pain, anger, and growing questions about safety. It happened at the Orange Resort and Water Sports Club, a popular spot for thrill seekers. A young woman from Karachi decided to try parasailing, despite concerns from staff about the competence of the parasailer taking her up. Still, the ride went ahead. At first, she rose into the air like hundreds of others before her, but then everything went wrong. According to eyewitnesses, her parasail collided midair with another, creating a dangerous tangle. Under the pressure, her chute collapsed, and she plummeted nearly 30 feet to the ground. The impact left her with a fractured leg, as horrified onlookers rushed to help. Thankfully, the Khanpur Rescue 1122 team responded quickly, transporting her to a nearby hospital for treatment. But while her injuries weren't life-threatening, the incident highlights a much bigger problem, one that locals say is spiraling out of control. You see, parasailing accidents at Khanpur Dam aren't rare. In fact, they're disturbingly common. According to local sources, dozens of mishaps happen every week. Some go unreported, while others get brushed aside as part of the risk. Behind it all, critics claim, is a regulatory system more interested in making money than enforcing safety. Training centers, often run under the banner of sports clubs, have mushroomed around the area. But many of these so-called operators are poorly trained and unequipped to handle emergencies. To make matters worse, participants are frequently asked to sign confidentiality waivers, basically legal documents that prevent them from making claims if something goes wrong. In other words, if you get hurt, you're on your own. This creates what some locals are calling a state of lawlessness. With little oversight, negligence and corruption thrive. Operators cut corners, regulations are ignored, and the result is that tourists, often unaware of the risks, end up paying the price. In this woman's case, her leg fracture is serious but recoverable. Yet it raises the question, what if the fall had been higher? What if the parasail had collapsed over water instead of land? Would rescuers have been able to respond quickly enough? These near misses and tragedies point to an urgent need for change. Adventure sports like parasailing can be safe, but only if strict standards are followed. Regular equipment checks, certified operators, weather monitoring, and clear safety protocols. Without those, the risk of accidents skyrockets. For now, Khanpur Dam remains a popular tourist destination, with parasailing among its biggest draws. But for many, this latest incident is a wake-up call. It's proof that behind the glossy marketing and the thrill of adventure, serious dangers are lurking. And unless authorities step in to prioritize safety over profit, accidents like this won't just keep happening, they'll keep getting worse. On August 28, 1988, one of the most shocking tragedies in airshow history unfolded before a crowd of nearly 300,000 spectators at Ramstein Air Base in West Germany. The event, known as Flugtag, was a showcase of military aviation, drawing families, aviation fans, and curious locals eager to see high-speed aerobatics from some of the world's most elite pilots. That afternoon, the Italian Air Force's famed display team, the Frecce Tricolori, prepared for their signature maneuver, the Pierced Heart. It was a breathtaking stunt involving 10 jets. 2 groups of planes would split away, 5 flying left and 4 flying right, sketching the shape of a giant heart across the sky. The final jet, call sign Pony 10, would then streak through the middle like an arrow piercing it. The formation was designed to wow audiences with perfect timing, speed and grace, but on this day the maneuver went fatally wrong. As the heart formation neared completion, Lieutenant Colonel Ivo Naldini, flying Pony 10, approached the crossing point at tremendous speed. In a split second, disaster struck. Pony 10 collided with Pony 1, tearing the tail off the lead aircraft. The crippled plane spun out of control, slamming into Pony 2. Within moments, all 3 jets were falling from the sky. Lieutenant Mario Naldini, piloting Pony 1, managed to eject, but his parachute had no time to fully deploy. He was killed instantly. The pilot of Pony 2, Giorgio Alessio, perished when his jet exploded mid-air. A medical helicopter nearby was also struck, killing its pilot. But the most horrifying part was still ahead. The flaming wreckage of Pony 10, now completely out of control, plummeted directly toward the packed spectator stands. In less than 7 seconds from the first collision, the jet slammed into the ground and exploded in a massive fireball. Tons of burning debris and molten metal rained down onto the crowd, right where thousands of families had gathered. What followed was sheer chaos. At first, stunned silence gripped the audience. Then, screams and panic erupted. Survivors described seeing people running with their clothes on fire, desperately trying to escape the flames. Others were trapped under wreckage or entangled in red-hot barbed wire, flung from nearby fences. Parents clutched their children, some badly burned, as rescuers rushed in. The scale of the disaster overwhelmed emergency crews. Vehicles of every kind, military, civilian, even private cars, were used to transport the injured to hospitals. Traffic jams stretched for hours as panicked spectators tried to flee the base while ambulances fought to get in. By the end, the toll was staggering. 70 people killed and 346 injured, many with life-altering burns and fractures. For years, the Ramstein disaster stood as the deadliest airshow accident in history. As for the cause, investigations pointed to one crucial factor. Lieutenant Colonel Naldini had likely entered the maneuver too fast and too low, leaving no room for error. Some witnesses claimed they saw Pony 10's landing gear drop just before impact, suggesting he may have tried to slow down in a desperate last-second attempt to avoid the collision. Others speculated about a sudden technical failure, but no definitive proof was ever found. The tragedy at Ramstein remains etched in aviation history, not only as a technical failure but as a haunting reminder of how quickly a dazzling display can turn into a nightmare. On May 5, 2007, what should have been a day of excitement at Expoland in Osaka, Japan, turned into tragedy. The park's stand-up roller coaster Fujin Raijin II, named after the gods of wind and thunder, derailed mid-ride, shocking both visitors and operators. The accident claimed the life of 19-year-old university student Yoshino Kogawara and left 19 other riders injured, some with serious wounds. The cause was traced to a fractured axle on the second car. This component, only 5 centimeters thick and 40 centimeters long, had been in continuous service since the ride's opening in 1992. For 15 years, it had never been replaced, and critically, it was not part of the park's regular inspection schedule. When the axle failed, the car destabilized and jumped the track, leaving passengers with no defense against the sudden derailment. Investigators later discovered that the other train operating on the ride also showed signs of cracks in its axles, highlighting a systemic failure in maintenance. In other words, this was not just an unfortunate fluke, it was an accident waiting to happen. Safety experts stressed that routine and thorough checks should have included such essential parts, especially on a high-intensity ride where stress on mechanical components is constant. Expoland initially shut down after the incident for inspections, attempting to recover its reputation. However, the shadow of the accident lingered. Attendance dropped sharply as the public lost confidence in the park's safety standards. By December 2007, just months after the derailment, Expoland closed again. 2 years later, in February 2009, the decision was made permanent. The Fujin Raijin II tragedy remains a stark reminder of how neglecting even the smallest detail in ride maintenance can have devastating consequences. Roller coasters may be designed for thrills, but those thrills rely on meticulous safety practices behind the scenes. For Expoland, a single broken axle was enough to bring down not only a ride, but the entire park itself. Parasailing is supposed to be a breathtaking adventure, a chance to soar high above the water, weightless and free. But for one 19-year-old Serbian teen named Tijana, what should have been a thrilling ride over the Adriatic Sea turned into a tragedy that stunned 2 countries. It happened on May 28th in the coastal city of Budva, Montenegro. Tijana was on the beach when a representative from a parasailing company approached her with what seemed like an exciting offer, a free flight. She agreed, not knowing it would be the last decision she ever made. At first, everything looked fine. She was strapped in, secured with a safety belt and life jacket, and lifted into the sky. But within moments, things took a terrifying turn. Harrowing video footage, later reviewed by local media, shows Tijana struggling in the air, fumbling with her safety belt. For reasons no one fully understands, she managed to unfasten it. Shockingly, she then removed her life jacket as well, and in less than 30 seconds the unthinkable happened. Tijana plummeted over 160 feet into the Adriatic Sea. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her father, identified only as Goran R., was left devastated. Speaking briefly to reporters, his grief was raw and overwhelming. "It's true, there was an accident. I just headed there. I can't tell you anything else." It was all he could manage to say after losing his daughter so suddenly. Neighbors described Tijana as a wonderful young woman from a close-knit family. Her father works as a taxi driver, her mother as a hairdresser, and together they raised 2 children in Novi Sad, Serbia. Friends said the family was always kind, always ready to help others. The news of her death rippled through the community, leaving everyone in disbelief. Meanwhile, questions swirled about how and why this tragedy happened. The owner of the parasailing company, Mirko Krdzic, admitted he was shocked. She did not show any fear of flying. She underwent training, after which the tragedy followed. He told reporters he insisted all equipment was undergoing technical inspections and that authorities were waiting for autopsy results to provide answers. But the details remain unsettling. Why did she unbuckle her safety harness? Why remove her life jacket, knowing she was hundreds of feet in the air? Some speculate panic or confusion, while others wonder if there was a malfunction or miscommunication during the flight. For now, investigators in Montenegro are still searching for answers. What makes the situation even more haunting is that Tijana hadn't even planned on parasailing that day. She didn't sign up in advance. She was approached on the beach with a casual offer of a free ride. In other words, what began as a spontaneous opportunity for fun turned into a devastating loss of life. Her body has since been transported back to her hometown of Novi Sad, where her family is preparing to lay her to rest. For them, there will never be answers good enough to explain how a simple vacation moment could unravel so horribly. This heartbreaking case is yet another reminder of how unpredictable parasailing can be. Even with training, even with equipment, even when things seem safe, one mistake, one decision, or one failure can turn the skies into a deadly place. On July 3, 1973, the aviation world witnessed a dark and unforgettable tragedy. The stage was the Paris Air Show in Le Bourget, France, one of the most prestigious aviation events on Earth, where nations unveiled their newest technological marvels. But this time, instead of a proud showcase, the event descended into horror before a stunned international audience. That year, competition in the skies was fierce. On one side was the Anglo-French Concorde, already dazzling crowds as the first commercial supersonic passenger jet. On the other stood the Soviet Union's response, the Tupolev Tu-144, quickly nicknamed Konkordsky because of its striking resemblance to its Western rival. The Cold War wasn't just about missiles and space. It extended into passenger aviation, and Le Bourget became the ultimate arena for this rivalry. The Tu-144 was still in its experimental phase, but this flight was meant to prove Soviet engineering could match the West. A crew of 6 carried not only the aircraft but the weight of national pride, as thousands of spectators, including rival engineers and journalists, watched closely. The jet took off and roared across the skies at less than 600 meters. To those on the ground, it was breathtaking, a massive airliner performing with the speed and sharpness of a fighter. Then, without warning, the plane pitched over violently and plunged into a steep dive. The engines thundered as if fighting to recover, but it was too late. Before tens of thousands of horrified spectators, the Tu-144 began to break apart in midair. fragments of the aircraft scattered before slamming into a nearby residential area. Within seconds, 15 houses were damaged or destroyed. When the dust cleared, all 6 crew members were dead, along with 8 civilians on the ground. In total, 14 lives were lost, and countless others traumatized by the violent spectacle. Investigators quickly launched an inquiry, but answers were elusive. One widely circulated theory suggested the Soviet pilot had been forced into a sudden evasive maneuver to avoid a French Mirage fighter jet. That Mirage had reportedly been scrambled to secretly photograph the Tu-144 during its flight. French officials later admitted the reconnaissance jet had been airborne, but denied it ever crossed the Tupolev's path. The wreckage offered little clarity. The main flight recorder, which could have explained the jet's final moments, had not been switched on before takeoff. Other recorders were destroyed in the crash. With so little evidence, the exact cause was never determined. Moscow moved swiftly to contain the fallout, covering all damages and compensation while keeping the full investigation report classified. For the Soviets, the tragedy was a crushing blow. The Tu-144 program was already plagued by design flaws and technical challenges. The Le Bourget disaster destroyed its credibility, and within years, the aircraft was phased out of development. Even Concorde, its Western rival, would see its ambitions limited to a handful of luxury routes before eventually being retired. Today, the Tu-144 crash at Le Bourget remains one of the most haunting moments in airshow history. What should have been a triumphant display of technological progress became a fiery catastrophe, one that left behind far more questions than answers. In the mid-1980s, West Edmonton Mall proudly boasted the world's largest indoor roller coaster, the Mindbender. With its triple loops twisting above shoppers' heads, it was marketed as both a marvel of engineering and a daring thrill ride. For many, conquering the Mindbender was not just about fun, but about bragging rights. On the night of June 14, 1986, however, the ride's reputation changed forever, when a mechanical failure turned an evening of excitement into a national tragedy. The problem began with something deceptively small. Missing bolts on the left wheel assembly of the last car went unnoticed. At over 100 kilometers per hour, even the slightest fault can spell disaster, and this flaw was catastrophic. As the train raced into one of its signature loops, the final car began to destabilize, wobbling violently before striking a steel support beam. The impact caused the car to flip sideways and crash into a concrete pillar. In that single terrifying moment, 3 passengers were killed instantly. A 4th was critically injured but survived. The rest of the riders were left suspended on the track, horrified witnesses to what had just occurred. Investigators quickly uncovered a grim reality. The tragedy was not a freak accident, but a preventable one. The ride's design and maintenance routines failed to account for such a flaw, allowing a small but critical detail to slip through the cracks. The Mindbender was shut down immediately, and its future was uncertain. After extensive modifications, including redesigned restraints and more rigorous safety systems, the ride reopened in 1987. Since then, it has operated without further major incidents, but the memory of that night has never faded. The Mindbender incident remains one of the darkest chapters in amusement park history. It underscored a hard truth. Behind the flashing lights and adrenaline rush, safety depends on relentless attention to detail. For those who lost their lives, the ride became more than an attraction. It became a stark reminder that even the most thrilling creations demand respect, precision, and vigilance. Vacations are meant to bring families closer together. Sun, sea, laughter, and memories that last a lifetime. But for one British family, a holiday in Turkey turned into a devastating nightmare when what was supposed to be a peaceful parasailing ride ended in tragedy. It was July 24th when Glenn Hudson, a 50-year-old father from Wivenhoe, Essex, decided to go parasailing with his 26-year-old daughter, Emma. They were strapped in together, lifted into the skies over the resort town of Side, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. Emma later recalled how her dad was joking and laughing, even making light of the situation. He teased about the harness possibly failing, never imagining those words would become chillingly real. Because in the very next moment, disaster struck. Glenn's harness suddenly snapped. Before anyone could react, he plummeted from the sky, leaving his daughter screaming helplessly as he fell. The ride that started with laughter ended in horror as Glenn Hudson lost his life. For Emma, the trauma was unimaginable. One second, she was sharing a bucket list experience with her father. The next, she was watching him vanish beneath her, powerless to save him. Those few moments in the air would stay with her forever. Authorities in Turkey quickly launched an investigation, and it didn't take long to uncover shocking negligence. The driver of the speedboat pulling the parasail and the owner of the parasailing company had cut corners, failing to properly check equipment and ignoring basic safety standards. The result? A man's life cut short in front of his own daughter. Both men were later found guilty of criminal negligence in a Turkish court. Each was sentenced to 20 months in prison, a small measure of justice for the Hudson family, though nothing could bring Glenn back. But for Glenn's wife, Linda, and their children, Emma and Ben, the grief is still raw. Linda spoke out after the verdict, determined that her husband's death should not be in vain. There were no checks, she said. They just strapped them in and sent them up. You think these people know what they are doing. You presume it is safe. I won't let what happened to Glenn go. I will fight for better safety regulations. Even if it saves one more life, it will have been worth it. The Hudsons aren't just grieving. They're campaigning. They want stricter safety inspections, mandatory equipment checks, and tougher rules for parasailing operators, especially in popular tourist hotspots where families often assume everything is regulated and safe. The family's lawyer, Katie Jones, explained just how hard the past year has been. This has been an incredibly difficult year for Mrs. Hudson, Emma, and Ben, who have been devastated by the loss of a loving father and husband. Although no prison sentence will ever make up for what they've suffered, they're relieved that some justice has been done. Glenn Hudson's story is a heartbreaking reminder that parasailing, while thrilling and beautiful, comes with risks, and that trusting operators blindly can sometimes end in disaster. His family hopes that by speaking out, others will think twice, ask more questions, and demand visible safety checks before strapping in. As Linda Hudson so powerfully put it, having fun is not worth the cost of a life. On September 6, 1952, what was supposed to be a proud celebration of British aviation turned into one of the most horrifying tragedies in airshow history. The event was the first major post-war air race, held in the English town of Farnborough. The excitement was electric. Around 120,000 spectators had gathered to watch cutting-edge aircraft show off their capabilities. At the center of the show was a sleek new British jet prototype, piloted by none other than John Derry, a national hero and aviation legend. Derry wasn't just any pilot. He was the first Briton to break the sound barrier in a jet, a symbol of post-war progress and national pride. To the massive crowd, seeing him perform was the highlight of the day, and Derry, ever the showman, wanted to give them a display they would never forget. Flying at astonishing speeds, he decided to create a spectacle by directing the shockwave of his jet right toward the spectator stands. First, he climbed to an altitude of over 12,000 meters, appearing as nothing more than a silver speck in the sky. Then he pointed the nose of the aircraft downward and roared earthward at nearly 800 kilometers per hour. The crowd squinted upward, watching that tiny dot grow larger and larger until it transformed into a roaring fighter jet streaking just overhead, no higher than 15 meters above their heads. The effect was breathtaking. The roar of the engines and the concussive blast of air reached them only after the jet had already vanished behind the stands. People gasped and cheered, their hearts pounding at the sheer thrill of it. But as Derry banked left to make another daring pass over the crowd, something went terribly, irreversibly wrong. At roughly 830 kilometers per hour, the aircraft suddenly began to fail under the strain. In less than a second, the jet's structure disintegrated. The outer wing sections, both engines and even the cockpit itself tore free from the airframe, scattering across the sky like shrapnel. With both crew members still trapped inside, the cockpit plummeted straight down, slamming into the ground directly in front of horrified spectators. The red-hot engines, still blazing from the stress of flight, hurtled like missiles into an area known as Observation Hill, a popular spot packed with hundreds of onlookers. For a brief moment, there was only stunned silence. The crowd, frozen in disbelief, could hardly process what had just happened. Then came the screams. Chaos erupted as people realized that not only had the pilots been killed, but debris and fiery wreckage had also torn through the stands. Witnesses later recalled seeing the lifeless bodies of the two crewmen flung onto a spectator fence. At the site of the engine impacts, a crater smoldered, surrounded by twisted wreckage and the remains of innocent victims. Among those killed was a young couple who had died holding each other, an image that would forever haunt those who saw it. The toll was staggering. 31 people lost their lives that day, including several children who had come with their families for what was meant to be their first air show. Another 63 were injured, many suffering gruesome skull fractures and broken bones that rescuers compared to battlefield wounds. Red Cross workers and emergency responders rushed to the scene, but even they were overwhelmed by the scale of the carnage. Investigators later determined the cause, a catastrophic design flaw in the aircraft's wings. Instead of meeting the required strength, the wings had only about 64% of the structural integrity needed to survive the violent maneuver Derry had attempted. In other words, the jet was doomed the moment he pushed it beyond its limits. The Farnborough disaster sent shockwaves through the aviation world. It forced organizers to impose stricter safety rules and redesign airshow protocols to protect spectators. Yet, as history would prove, even these changes could not prevent future tragedies on an even greater scale. In the spring of 1997, Tulsa's Bell's Amusement Park was packed with the usual sights and sounds of a carefree weekend, with families strolling with funnel cakes, kids tugging on sleeves for just one more ride, and the Wildcat roller coaster clattering up its first hill. For years, the Wildcat had been a local favorite, offering just enough thrills to keep adrenaline seekers coming back. But on April 20th, that sense of fun was shattered in an instant, when the ride that was supposed to deliver excitement instead delivered tragedy. As the coaster cars were being pulled to the top of the lift hill, something went horribly wrong. Instead of locking into place, the train slipped loose, rolled backward down the incline, and crashed into another car behind it. The violent collision turned an ordinary day into chaos, leaving screams of excitement replaced with cries of shock. The accident proved fatal for a 14-year-old boy riding in the front car, who was ejected and struck his head. 6 others were injured in the terrifying rollback, some badly enough to require hospital care. What made the tragedy even more unnerving was the fact that the Wildcat had passed state inspection just 2 weeks earlier. The safety systems, including the anti-rollback device designed specifically to prevent such a disaster, had been approved and cleared. Yet, in the critical moment, that very system failed. Investigators were left puzzled, unable to replicate the malfunction or determine precisely why it happened. The uncertainty only deepened the unease, since something meant to protect riders simply did not work when it was most needed. In the aftermath, the Wildcat's legacy in Tulsa came to an abrupt end. The coaster was dismantled and relocated to Maryland, operating under a new name, Avalanche, as if to distance itself from the shadow of that day. For the families and witnesses who lived through the incident, however, the memory could not be so easily relocated. The 1997 Wildcat accident remains a somber reminder that while roller coasters are built to thrill, even the best-maintained rides can carry risks. It was a day that underscored how quickly joy can turn into tragedy, leaving a lasting mark on both the park and the community.